There we go. Okay. So just to remind you a little bit of where we came from, uh, we'll we'll read this first part of John 7. Remember, Jesus is at the Feast of Booths, or also called, alternatively called the Feast of Tabernacles. And it got that name because people would build booths or huts or tents or something like that. And it started with the farmers, and it's celebrating the grapes and the olive harvest, and those are apparently notoriously picky things to grow, and so they needed to be close by. But the Feast of Booths and the Feast of Tabernacles ended up being part of that that feast, part of that celebration. So the people coming to Jerusalem from other parts of Israel would build their own little huts or booths, and as part of that celebration. So Feast of Booths, Feast of Tabernacles, same thing. But if you're Jewish, today you call it Sukkot. And so if you see that written somewhere, also the same thing. We're going to read this again in a little bit. So Jesus stays out of the public spotlight. His brothers tell him to go, and he stays in Galilee. And that's what it tells us here. And I gave you all of these answers, but what is the only one that is legitimate? Yeah, the Pharisees were becoming more antagonistic. And it says that right, well, not with those words, but it says it right in the text that he stayed in Galilee because the opposition against him by the Pharisees, by the Jews, the Jewish leadership, was growing greater. So we'll start with verses 1 through 5. After this, Jesus went about in Galilee. He would not go about in Judea because the Jews were seeking to kill him. Now, the Jews' Feast of Booths was at hand. It was coming quickly. So his brothers said to him, "Leave here and go to Judea, that your disciples also may see the works you are doing. For no one works in secret if he seeks to be known openly. If you do these things, you should show yourself to the world." For not even his brothers believed in him. And we talked about how his brothers urge him to go to the feast, and he says, he doesn't listen to what they're saying. And the curriculum said that they failed to understand his impending death. Well, of course they did, because nobody could have figured that out. But here's the thing. That's not what he's saying. And I told you this, whatever day that is that we last had school, Tuesday or something like that. I told you that Jesus uses the word Kairos instead of hora. When he uses the word hora, which is translated "my hour is not yet come," he's saying it's not my time to die. It's not my time for my glorification by the cross and the empty tomb. In this case, Kairos just means time. It's not my time to go to the feast, is what he's saying. His brothers want him to go make a big show of himself. And that's the last thing he wants, because he doesn't want to make a big stir and have people trying to arrest him at this point. When the time does come, he's going to walk right into that arrest. So it's not that he's afraid to be arrested. It's just not the time yet. So it also wasn't time for him to go to the feast. My guess is, because it tells us that he went privately to the feast. He went incognito, you might say, to the feast, because he didn't want to stir things up. And that's what the text tells us. And so what he's saying is, it's not, you guys go ahead. I'll come, but not now. Because he was under God's timetable. When he says you guys can go anytime, it's because you're not going when God says to go. And Jesus is going when God says to go. So Jesus, it says this in verse 6 to 9. Jesus said, "My time has not yet come, but your time is always here. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify about it that its works are evil. You go up to the feast. I'm not going up to this feast, for my time has not yet fully come." After saying this, he remained in Galilee. Now, I mentioned to you the other day that it can makes it sound like he's maybe being not completely forthright, not completely honest. But that's not what he's saying. He's saying, "I'm not going yet." It was required for Jewish males to go to the feasts. So, of course, he's going. But he's not going with his brothers who want to make a big, uh, a big brouhaha. He's going to go more quietly to Jerusalem. And then it talks about, we talked about this too, the brother's selfish request. I'm not sure that this is really a selfish request of them to say, "Hey, let's go." Maybe they're just wanting to be part of his notoriety. That happens sometimes when people get famous. They gather all these people around them that want to be near them because they want to get the attention of the famous person. And that's not why he's. Um, so Jesus goes to the feast in secret. But after his brothers had gone up to the feast, then he, Jesus, also went up, not publicly, but in private. The Jews were looking for him at the feast and saying, "Where is he?" And there was much muttering about him among the people. While some said, "He is a good man," others said, "No, he is leading the people astray." Yet for fear of the Jews, no one spoke openly about him. And we talked about this muttering that was going on. And I told you that the Hebrew word for that is gongasmos, and it even sounds a little bit like they're grumbling against Jesus. And I think this is kind of where we're picking up after on verse 14. So here's some stuff about the Feast of the Tabernacles in general. So it was a major festival of the Jews. It was ordained by God in the book of Leviticus. It was 7 days in duration. It was in the fall. And the Jews lived in booths that they had made. And it's also called, today it's called Sukkot by the Jews. And it had two purposes. One was it was a memorial to God for giving them the land and the food that came from the land. So the first thing is that they were looking back to God's provision in the wilderness for the Jews and remembering that. And I think I told you that the most often in law in or command in the Bible is remember. God wants us to remember what he's done for us and who we once were and how he has changed us and all those things. We're to remember those things that God has done. And so that's part of what the Feast of Tabernacles is doing. They're remembering how God cared for them in the desert. But then the second part of that is that they're thanking God for the harvest, or particularly the olives and the grapes. And so it was also a feast of gratitude to God for that. But at this particular festival, the people had something else on their minds, someone else on their minds. Where's Jesus? What's he going to do? Are they going to arrest him? Are they going to kill him? And it became a very divisive and passionate debate among the Jews. And the people were divided. And they were also afraid of the Jewish leaders. And to align yourself with Jesus could have really horrible consequences at that time. That's still true in some parts of our world. We don't generally understand that at all. If you ask someone about persecution here, you know, well, my friend made fun of me. Well, sure, but nobody's going to kill you because you're a Christian, right? So that it's a lot different in other parts of our world than it was in Jesus' day as well. So people are muttering, as I said, about him. Let's go to next verses here. Verses 14 through 16. People marvel at his brilliance. About the middle of the feast, Jesus went up to the temple and began teaching. The Jews therefore marveled, saying, "How is it that this man has learning when he has never studied?" So Jesus answered them, "My teaching is not mine, but it is who sent, but his who sent me." So what he's saying is that God has taught me this teaching. Now, first you have to understand how rabbis, how it worked that you became a rabbi. I'm going to give you these first. They marveled at his brilliance. What would happen in the rabbinical tradition is that you would study under a known scholar and use his teaching as a precedent, as a foundation for your own teaching. And you would study with him, and you would live with him, and you would go everywhere he went until you were ready to be a rabbi and have followers as well. Well, they knew that he had never studied under anyone. And so how does he know all this? He's a carpenter. He had a very, very little education, if any. And so what the Jews are questioning is, which rabbi gave Jesus this learning, this religious authority? If you were studying under, say, Gamaliel, one of the foremost rabbis of Jesus' day, you could say, well, I get my authority from Gamaliel. But he hadn't studied under anyone. Basically, what he's saying is, I studied under God. Is that good enough for you? Is that a high enough authority for you? And that's essentially what he's saying. So Jesus answers their questions in a different way. The question, where did you go to school? Heaven. I went to school in heaven. Who was your teacher? God. God was my teacher, which they didn't understand. But it reminds me of when my sister was in high school. My next youngest sister was in high school, and we were at a church. I won't name the church, but it was the denomination was Presbyterian, and there were some people that were upset because the Sunday school teacher for the high schoolers wasn't using the Presbyterian curriculum. And so my dad was on that leadership board, and so I remember the conversation with my sister. And my dad said, his name was Gary, Does Gary use the Presbyterian materials? And my sister's answer, she's at least as sarcastic as I am. And she said, he uses the Bible. Is that Presbyterian? And what her point was is no, he's doing better than using the Presbyterian materials. He's using the Bible. And so that's essentially what Jesus is saying. No, I'll do you one better. I didn't study under a rabbi. God's my rabbi. The Father is my rabbi. And that's even better. So verses 17 and 18 say this. If anyone's will is to do God's will, he will know whether the teaching is from God or whether I am speaking on my own authority. Though if you really know God, you'll know if I'm from God or not. The one who speaks on his own authority seeks his own glory, but the one who seeks the glory of him who sent him is true, and in him there is no falsehood. What he's saying is that some people preach selfishly, and Paul says this too, that they can just get fame for themselves, attention for themselves, be considered one of the eminent scholars in the land. And Jesus is saying, all I'm trying to do is glorify the Father. The person you can trust is the person that's not looking out for their own, but looking out for God's glory, wanting God to be glorified. And I think this can be a problem in the church in recent years, even in my lifetime, where pastors want to become celebrity pastors. Just that term, celebrity pastor. To me, that's an oxymoron. Those two words shouldn't go together. Because celebrities are all about getting hugged for themselves, right? Getting known themselves. We are to make much of Jesus. We are here to make Jesus known, not us. And that's what's happening here. Jesus is saying, look, I'm not looking for my own. I'm not looking out for myself. I'm not looking for publicity for me. I want to make much of God. I want to make much of the Father. And that's a way to tell someone who's really teaching truth and wanting to do what God wants them to do. So he's saying that he's doing God's will, and another answer to that would be that he is keeping the law, and they aren't keeping the law. And he says, for example, you're trying to kill me, and I'm innocent, so that's not keeping the law. That's against the law to do that. And so he's the one that is keeping the law and not the Jewish leadership. And remember where he is and when he is. He's in the temple during one of the big feasts. It is crowded. There are a ton of people hearing this, hearing him kind of dress down the Jewish leadership. And they're enthralled with it. Jewish leadership isn't happy, but they're enthralled with it. So then Jesus gives an explanation. Has not Moses given you the law? Yet none of you keeps the law. Why do you seek to kill me? And that's what I just talked about. You're not keeping the law. For example, you're trying to kill me. And the crowd answered, you have a demon. Who is seeking to kill you? Now, they obviously didn't know that, or they were denying it. They either didn't know or they were lying. But even some of the people we've already read said, is this the guy that they're trying to kill? Is this the guy that they want to kill? So it was known that they were trying to kill them. I think maybe they were just trying to get away with something and not the truth. Then Jesus' explanation is this. Jesus answered them, I did one work, and you all marvel at it. Moses gave you circumcision, not that it is from Moses, but from the fathers. And you circumcise a man on the Sabbath. If on the Sabbath a man receives circumcision, So it wasn't, you weren't, if you circumcised a child on the 8th day, and so after birth, and so if that was a Sabbath, so be it. The guy whose job it was to circumcise that baby still did his job. You aren't breaking the Sabbath in that case. You've got to remember that. If on the Sabbath a man receives circumcision, so that the law of Moses may not be broken, are you angry with me because on the Sabbath I made a man's whole body well? Do not judge by appearances, but judge with right judgment. And so the people then, Jesus exposes their ignorance of what's going on. Let me explain this a little bit. So this passage is connected to the healing in John 5, where he healed the lame man at the pool of Bethesda. Everybody remember that? On what day? On the Sabbath. So when he says, I did one work, and you guys got all angry at me. And so that when he says making his whole body well, this is what he's referring to. But we have to back up and talk about circumcision. So circumcision was given to Abraham, but it was put into law under Moses. So they circumcised from the time of Abraham, but it became officially law when Moses wrote the law. And it was seen as, I know this is weird, but it was seen as a perfecting rite. It made it made the person perfect, perfected it. It was a renewal or a sort of healing. And I know that sounds weird to us, but that's the way they viewed it. And that's important to know because of what Jesus is saying. So if the 7th day, I said 8th day, sorry, if the 7th day after birth was a Sabbath, they still performed the circumcision. And the guy that did it, his job was called, he was a berit. That was his job, was to do that. So he was working on the Sabbath if he circumcised a little boy. And so even though it was on the Sabbath, the person was performing that work. So here's what Jesus is saying. He says, if it's okay to heal someone partially on the Sabbath through circumcision, then why is it not okay to heal someone? Why is it not okay to make a man completely whole, completely clean, completely healed? So Jesus is not breaking the Sabbath, in part because of what he's doing, but also because he's fulfilling both the Sabbath and circumcision in doing so. And he's also going to make the point later on. He is Lord of the Sabbath. He created the Sabbath. He created the universe. He is Lord over it. So he can't break the Sabbath. Let me see if I missed anything. So, verses 25 through 27. Some of the people of Jerusalem, therefore, said, is this not the man whom they seek to kill? And here he is, speaking openly, and they say nothing to him. Can it be that the authorities really know that this is the Christ? But we know where he comes from. So the people become even more confused about what's going on here. He couldn't be the Messiah. They know where he comes from, and they believe that they wouldn't know when Messiah came. He would be born in Bethlehem, or he would come from Bethlehem, but they wouldn't know. Essentially, they wouldn't see him coming. Why did the Jewish leaders want to kill him? Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a power struggle, and they're losing power to Jesus. But I think they're using this idea of breaking the law as a smokescreen. And if you break the law, you could get arrested for that. But they're not understanding what Jesus is saying, and there's a whole lot of misunderstanding going around in general. So let's talk about this a little bit. So the first thing they're asking is, where's this guy from? And Jesus realized rightly, the Jews realized rightly that Jesus was claiming to be Messiah. If God is his father, not in the sense that God is father to others, like he is God's son, then he's claiming to be Messiah. But they wrongly believed that Messiah would appear suddenly out of nowhere and bring immediate deliverance. And that was a teaching that grew up over time, but it was wrong. But in their minds, look, first of all, he didn't appear out of nowhere. We know he's from Galilee. He hasn't brought deliverance. He can't be Messiah. And Jesus' response in verses 28 and 29 is really important to understand what he's saying. He claims to be Messiah. So Jesus proclaimed at every see that part that he claims to be the Messiah. Jesus proclaimed as he taught in the temple, you know me and you know where I come from. I think that's a question. Like, you think you know me, but you don't. But I have not come of my own accord. He who sent me is true, meaning God the Father, and him you do not know. I know him, for I come from him, and he sent me. So what he's saying is, God is my Father, and he sent me, and I'm Messiah. But they didn't get that. And I believe it doesn't read in the ESV as a question, but I believe that it very well could be a question. Do you really know me? Do you really know where I come from? But why was that so offensive to them? Well, first of all, the Jews prided themselves on being God's people. They knew God. Nobody else knew God. And they were very proud of that, which is not a good thing. Grateful? Yeah. Proud? No. So Jesus is saying, I'm not here on my own. But it's truly God who sent me. And then he says, you don't know him. Now think about them priding themselves on knowing God, and this guy comes up and says, no, you don't. Now let's say you prided yourself for being a really good basketball player. Someone said, yeah, right? And that would be fighting words, wouldn't it, Kelby? Yeah, that'd be fighting words to any cock, I think. And that's, you could take that many times higher on that. So Jesus is saying, I'm not here on my own, but it's truly God who sent me. When he says you don't know him, that was a double insult. So Jesus says, you don't know God, and he says, God is revealing himself through me. In the mouth of anyone that was not Messiah, that would be preposterous. It would be blasphemy. And that's what they thought. It was blasphemy. And that is a punishable offense. That is a capital offense. That is an offense that not only you can be arrested for, but be executed. And that's exactly what the Jews thought he was committing, that he was committing blasphemy. So there's plenty of misunderstanding going around. The people become more confused, and they and they seek to kill him. So they were seeking to arrest him, but no one laid a hand on him because his hour had not yet come. Now we see hour or his time to be arrested and to die has not yet come, but it's coming. At the same time, many believe him. Many believe that he is telling the truth. Yet many of the people believed in him. They said, when the Christ appears, will he do more signs than this man has done? What more does he have to do to prove that he is? And then the Pharisees heard the crowd muttering these things about him, and the chief priests and Pharisees sent officers to arrest him. Jesus then said, I will be with you a little longer, and then I am going to him who sent me. You will seek me, and you will not find me. Where I am, you cannot come. The Jews said to one another, where does this man intend to go that we will not find him? Does he intend to go to the dispersion among the Greeks outside of Israel and teach the Greeks? What does he mean by saying, you will seek me and you will not find me, and where I am, you cannot come? And so again, misunderstanding in John, and they don't get what's going on. So that's it for the lecture. I'll have to take that quiz tomorrow, and we'll move right on to the next chapter.